The night before her journey, Gracelyn Hudson barely slept. The little cabin felt too quiet, too invalid for the heaviness inside her chest. She sat at the rough kitchen table long after midnight, counting and recounting the small pile of coins she'd spilled onto the wood. $3716. She pushed the silver pieces into 3 small piles. Rent, stagecoach fare, food for her son. The money looked even smaller tonight, like it might disappear if she blinked too hard. Her hands shook as she moved the coins from one pile to another, whispering numbers until her throat tightened. $22 for the state store. Cedar Springs. $8 for rent due at the end of the week. $7 and change for flour, beans, salt, pork, enough to keep her boy fed while she traveled. The numbers refused to cooperate no matter how many times she rearranged them. In the end, she slid the rent money aside, choosing the fare instead. Her fingers lingered on those $8 before she pushed them toward the edge of the table and whispered, "Lord, watch this house while I am gone." Her son Zachary padded out in his nightshirt, rubbing his sleepy eyes with small fists. He was 7 years old. All knobby knees and serious brown eyes that looked too old for his face sometimes. "Mama, you're leaving for Grandma in the morning." "Yes, sweetheart." He climbed into her lap, warm and small, and asked in a trembling voice, "If Grandma goes to heaven, will she still know me?" The question cut straight through her ribs. She held him tight, kissing the top of his head where his hair smelled like soap and little boy sweat. "She'll know you even if 100 years pass." Before she tucked him back in bed, he pressed a wooden horse head carved into her hand. The edges were rough, the legs uneven, but had spent 3 weeks whittling it from a piece of oak. "Take him so you won't get lonely," he whispered. She cried after he fell asleep, quietly with her fist pressed to her mouth as he would not awake, then rose before dawn, washed her face in cold water from the basin, and pinned up her hair like a woman determined not to fall apart again. By the time she reached Cateres station the next morning, exhaustion clung to her like dust on a dry road. The station stood at the edge of town. A weathered building with a crooked sign that read Overland Stage Company, eastbound and west. 3 other passengers waited on the wooden platform. A portly merchant in a brown suit that strained at the buttons, a farm couple who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, and an older woman clutching a carpet bag to her chest. Gracelyn stood apart from them, her cloth traveling bag hanging from one shoulder, her second-best shuffle wrapped tight against the morning chill. She'd worn her better dress today, the grey one with only 2 patches instead of 5, but it still looked worn next to the merchant's polished shoes. When the stagecoach rattled up in a cloud of dust, pulled by 6 horses that looked as tired as she felt, the driver climbed down and opened the door. The merchant pushed forward first, followed by the farm couple. Gracelyn stepped up last, her skirt catching on a bent nail near the door frame. She took it once, twice, then muttered under her breath, "Wonderful. Haven't even left town, and the doorway already hates me." A hand reached down from inside the coach, broad, strong, with clean nails, and lifted her back before she could protest. She glanced up and found herself looking into the calmest grey eyes she'd ever seen. The man sat in the far corner of the coach, dressed finer than anyone she'd seen on a frontier road in months. His coat was dark wool, well-sewed with buttons that caught the light. His boots were polished black leather, free of the dust and manure stains most men wore like badges. His hat sat on the seat beside him, revealing dark hair suit, shorter than the rough trail hands who drifted through town. He looked like he'd stepped out of a San Francisco hotel, not a dusty state station in the Montana Territory. "Thank you," she said softly, embarrassed by how shabby her back looked in his hands. He set it on the floor near her feet and nodded once. "Mom." His voice was low, controlled, with an accent she told not quite Platze. Not quite Eastern, not quite Southern. Used clean and measured, like every word had been considered before it left his mouth. She settled onto the hard bench across from him as the coach lurched into motion. The wheels rattled over the rough road, and she gripped the edge of the seat to keep from sliding. The merchant immediately launched into a loud complaint about the condition of the roads, the quality of the horses, and the general decline of stage travel in the territory. The farm wife nodded along without really listening, her husband already dozing with his head tipped back. Gracelyn caught herself staring at the stranger across from her. He sat utterly still, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze fixed somewhere out the window. Everything about him spoke of control. The way he held his shoulders, the way his jaw stayed relaxed, even when the coach hit a deep root, and everyone else gasped. He didn't grip the seat or brace himself. He moved with the motion like he'd been born riding rough roads. She noticed how clean he was again, too clean for a man who claimed to be traveling through cattle country. The words slipped out before she could stop them. "You're awfully tidy for a man who claims to ride with cattle." He turned his head slowly, one eyebrow lifting just slightly. "I bathed last month. That's practically fancy around here." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough to make her cheeks warm. She looked away quickly, mortified that she'd spoken at all. The road stretched out before them, winding through open grassland dotted with sagebrush and the occasional stand of cottonwoods. The sky hung low and grey, threatening rain, but not quite delivering. Gracelyn kept her eyes on the passing landscape, trying not to think about the letter folded in her pocket. The letter had arrived just days ago, brought by a rider passing through on his way to Billings. Her mother's neighbor had written it in careful slanted handwriting. "Your mother has taken ill, the doctor says it is her heart. Come soon if you can." That last line, "if you can," had burned into her mind as if there were a choice. As if a daughter would not scrape together every coin she had and leave her child with neighbors used to sit beside her mother's bed. Gracelyn's hands shook slightly as she pulled the letter out and read it again. Even though she'd memorized every word, the paper crinkled in her grip. Across from her, the stranger noticed. She saw his gaze dropped to her trembling fingers, then rise to her face. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry. He just said quietly, "You looked like you haven't slept in a month." She gave a weak laugh and folded the letter back into her pocket. "Feels like longer." He didn't push. He just nodded once like he understood something about exhaustion that most people didn't. The merchant droned on about the price of wool and the incompetence of territorial governors. The older woman clutched her carpet back tighter every time the coach swayed. The farm couple sat in tired silence, their shoulders touching in that way long married people did without thinking. Gracelyn wondered what this stranger saw when he looked at her. A tired widow in a patched dress traveling alone. A woman who could not even afford to sit straight without her back aching from too many nights sleeping on a thin mattress and too many days scrubbing other people's floors. She'd been 23 when her husband died. Thomas Hudson had been a good man, quiet, hardworking, steady. Had bought a small piece of land outside town, built a cabin with his own hands, planted wheat and barley, raised a few head of cattle. Then one morning had gone out to fix a fence. And the horse had spooked, thrown him, and crushed his ribs against a rock. Had lived 3 days coughing blood before his lungs gave out. That was 4 years ago. Gracelyn had been alone ever since, raising Zachary on laundry work and sewing jobs that paid pennies. The land stayed in her name, but she had no way to work it. Thomas's brothers had offered to buy it for her what it was worth. She'd refused. Some lawyers in town had sent letters saying men were interested in purchasing the water rights. She'd refused those, too. Now, she wondered if refusing had been pride or stupidity. The coach hit a deep root. And everyone jolted forward. The merchant cursed. The older woman gasped. Gracelyn's shoulder slammed into the side wall hard enough to bruise The stranger didn't flinch. He just shifted his weight slightly, compensating for the motion like had ridden 1,000 rough roads, and this was nothing special. Gracelyn found herself watching him again. There was something about the way he sat, calm, contained, almost unnaturally still, that made her think of men who'd been soldiers, or scouts, or trail bosses who'd led caravans through territory where one wrong move could get everyone killed. She wondered what his name was. She wondered what he was doing on a second-rate stage, heading to an overtown like Cedar Springs. She wondered if he had a wife waiting somewhere, or children, or if he was as alone as she was, but she didn't ask. Asking felt like opening a door she didn't have the strength to walk through. Instead, she turned her face to the window and watched the gray sky stretch on forever. By midday, the road grew rougher. Recent rains had turned sections of the trail into thick, sucking mud. The driver cursed upon his bench, snapping the rest to keep the horses moving. Inside the coach, everyone swayed and bumped against each other. The older woman started praying quietly, her lips moving without sound. Graceland's stomach churned. She hadn't eaten since dawn. Half a biscuit and weak coffee before she'd left the cabin. Now her head felt light, her vision swimming slightly at the edges. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe slowly, evenly. Across from her, the stranger said, "Put your head down if you need to." She opened her eyes. "I am fine. You're pale." He said, "I am fine." He didn't argue. He just settled back into his corner and went quiet again. Gracelyn hated how sharp her voice had sounded. Hated that she told her not to even accept kindness without her pride flaring up like a match in regress. She pressed her hand to her stomach and stared hard at the floor, willing the nausea to pass. The coach finally lurched to a stop. The driver shouted down. Roads washed out ahead. "Everybody out. We're pushing through." The merchant grunted. The farm husband sighed. The older woman crossed herself. Gracelyn climbed down carefully, her boot sinking immediately into thick black mud that grabbed at her hem. Rain had turned this section of road into a quagmire. Deep roots filled with water. The wheels of the coach sank halfway to the hubs. The driver jumped down, swearing under his breath. "All right, folks. Men on the back wheels, women on the sides. We push on me count." The merchant took one look at his fine suit and shook his head. "I am not ruining me clothes for this." The stranger, who'd been silent this whole time, stepped forward. His voice chewed through the merchant's complaint like a knife through butter. "You'll push or you'll walk the rest of the way." The merchant's mouth snapped shut. The stranger moved to the back of the coach, positioning himself at the left wheel. The farm husband took the right. Gracelyn and the older woman braced themselves against the sides, gripping the door frame. The stranger looked at each person in turn, his gray eyes calm and utterly commanding. "On the next heave, everyone is together. Not before, wait for me word." Gracelyn felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't a man asking for help. This was a man who'd led people through worse than a muddy road. Someone who knew how to make decisions and expected them to be followed. "Ready," he said. "1, 2, push." They all pushed. The coach grunted, the wheels sucking deeper before they finally broke free with a wet sucking sound. The horses strained forward, and the coach lurched onto firmer ground. Everyone stood panting, covered in mud. Gracelyn's shuffle was soaked through, her skirt heavy and filthy. She'd slipped twice, catching herself on the wheel before she went down completely. The stranger walked around the coach, checking the wheels with the practiced eye of someone who knew how things broke and how to fix them. Mud sucked his boots, splattered his coat, but he didn't seem to notice. He glanced at Gracelyn. "You all right?" She nodded, too breathless to speak. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then climbed back into the coach. "Gracelyn, followed, her legs shaking from exertion and hunger. She collapsed onto the bench, dripping mud onto the floor. The stranger produced a clean handkerchief from his pocket and held it out to her. You missed a spot. She blinked at him, then realized he was gesturing toward her cheek. She took the cloth and wiped, feeling the grit of dried mud come away. When she handed it back, she saw she'd only smeared the mud around more. He looked at the ruined handkerchief, then at her face, and something like amusement flickered in his eyes. Not mockery, just warmth. Gracelyn felt her cheeks burn. She turned away quickly, staring hard at the window. The coach rode on. By late afternoon, the gray sky had darkened to charcoal. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and threatening. The temperature dropped, and wind began to rattle the coach. The older woman pulled her shawl tighter. Storm's coming. The merchant muttered something about poor timing and worse luck. Gracelyn felt the first prickle of unease creep up her spine. She told herself it was just weather, just rain and wind. Nothing to fear. But when the first lightning bolt split the sky, brilliant white too close, her whole body went rigid. Thunder followed. A crack so loud it felt like the heart splitting open. Gracelyn's breath caught in her throat. Her hands gripped the edge of the seat, knuckles white. Suddenly, she wasn't in the coach anymore. She was 8 years old again, standing in her father's barn during a summer storm. The wind had screamed through the gaps in the walls, lifting the roof, tearing at the beams. She'd watched, frozen, as one side of the barn collapsed inward, trapping her younger brother beneath a pile of splintered wood. She remembered his screams. She remembered the smell of wet hay and blood. Remembered her father lifting beans with his bare hands, shouting for help that came too late. Her brother had lived, but had walked with a limp the rest of his life. Another crack of thunder shook the coach. Gracelyn's vision blurred, her chest tightened. Breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She could not get enough air, could not think past the roaring in her ears. A hand touched her wrist. Steady, warm. Ground him. Breathe with me. The stranger's voice stood through the panics. Low, calm, certain. In, he said, and out, she tried. Her lungs stuttered, refusing to cooperate. Slower, he said. In through your nose, out through your mouth. His hand stayed on her wrist, not grip him, just resting there. Solid, real. Gracelyn focused on his voice, on the pressure of his fingers against her pulse. She breathed in. Hold it. Let it out again. Again. The roaring in her ears faded. The tightness in her chest loosened. She realized she was shaking. I am sorry, she whispered. I don't. Storms used you don't of me. Explanation. She looked up at him. His face was closer now, his gray eyes watching her with something that looked almost like recognition. When he was 18, he said quietly, I led a wagon train through the Rockies. Though I knew the trail, took a shortcut, too close to a cliff edge. One of the wagons slid off. I took 2 mules with it. His you've tightened used barrel. Ever since then, heights make my stomach turn over. The centimeter if it is a cliff or a tall building. The fear's the same. Gracelyn stared at him. She hadn't expected him to share something so personal. Hanek expected vulnerability from a man who seemed carved from stone. You're telling me the mighty trail boss is brave until the ground disappears? She said, her voice still shaky but trying for humor, his mouth curved slightly. Seems fair, don't you think? She managed a weak laugh. I suppose the storm raged outside, but inside the coach something had shifted. She'd seen him, really seen him, and had let her. The rain drummed harder. Lightning flashed. Thunder rolled, but Graceland's breathing stayed steady. The coach rolled into a way station used as full darkness fell. The building was small, rough hewn logs with A second porch and a crooked chimney leaking smoke. A sign over the door. Read, Miller's Rest, food and lodging. Everyone climbed down stiffly, soaked. And exhausted. The station keeper, a grizzled man with a tobacco-stained beard, waved them inside toward a dining room that smelled of fried salt pork and burnt coffee. Graceline hesitated at the door. She had $2 left after paying for the stage. Food here would cost at least 75. That left barely enough for the return fare. She could skip the meal. She'd gone hungry before, but her stomach cramped painfully and her hands still shook from the earlier panics. The stranger appeared beside her. He didn't look at her. You said to the station keeper, bring her stew and coffee. Put it on me bill. Gracine's face flushed hot. You don't need to do that. He finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. I know, but you needed it. Then he walked to a corner table and sat down, effectively ending the conversation. Graceline stood frozen for a moment, torn between pride and hunger. And something else she didn't have a name for. Finally, she sat at a table near the window, and waited for the food to arrive. When it did, thick beef stew with carrots and potatoes, bread still warm from the oven, strong black coffee. She ate slowly, savoring every bite. She couldn't remember the last time someone had simply taken care of something for her without asking for anything in return. Across the room, the stranger ate his own meal in silence, his gaze distant. Graceline wondered what he was thinking. She wondered what kind of man bought a meal for a stranger and didn't make a show of it. I wondered why her chest felt lighter than it had in years. The next morning, it dawned cold and drizzly. Graceline woke in the tiny room she'd shared with the older woman. 2 narrow cots, a single blanket each, walls so thin she could hear the merchant snoring through them. Her back ached from the hard mattress. Her dress, hung by the stove to dry overnight, still felt damp. She dressed quickly, pinned her hair back, and splashed water on her face from the basin. When she looked in the cracked mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized herself. Dark circles under her eyes, hollow cheeks, lips chapped from the wind. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman hanging on by her fingernails. Downstairs, the stranger already sat at a table with a cup of coffee and a plate of eggs. He glanced up when she entered, nodded once, and went back to his meal. Graceline bought a biscuit and weak coffee 20 cents and sat at a different table. She told herself it was because she didn't want to impose. The truth was she didn't trust herself around him. He made her feel too much too quickly. The coach left at 8 hodin. Sharp. The rain had stopped, but the sky stayed gray and threatening. The road ahead looked like a river of mud. The driver climbed onto his bench and cracked the reins. Hold tight, folks. It is going to be rough. He wasn't exaggerating. Within an hour, they hit another flooded section. This time, the mud was deeper, thick as molasses, grabbing at the wheels like hands pulling them down. The horses strained, their hooves sliding. The coach tilted sharply to the left. The older woman screamed, the merchant cursed. The farm wife grabbed her husband's arm and then the coach stopped moving entirely, sank deep into the mirror. The driver jumped down, swearing a blue streak. Everybody out. We're stuck worse than last time. Graceline climbed down, her boots immediately disappearing into ankle-deep mud. The cold seeped through the leather, soaking her stockings. She grabbed the side of the coach to keep from slipping. The stranger stepped past her, already assessing the situation. He walked around the coach slowly, checking each wheel, then turned to the driver. We'll need to dig out the front wheels first. Otherwise, we're you spin him. The driver nodded. Have you done this before? More times than I'd like. They worked together, the stranger directing everyone like had they been born to it. The farm husband and the merchant dug mud away from the wheels with their hands. The older woman and Graceline pushed from The sides. The stranger and the driver positioned themselves at the back, ready to lift when the moment came. Graceline's hands burned. Her shoulders screamed. Mud covered her from hem to waist, cold and filthy. She slipped once, going down. Hard on one knee, the impact charring her teeth. She scrambled back up, ignoring the pain, and kept pushing. The stranger's voice cut through the chaos. One more time, all together. Now they pushed. The coach granted, schuddereth. Then lurched forward with a sickening squelch. The wheels broke free. The horses pulled hard, and suddenly they were on solid ground again. Graceline stood panting, covered head to toe in mud. Her hands shook. Her legs felt like water. The stranger walked over to her, barely winded. He glanced at her muddy dress. Her trembling hands. You all right? She nodded, not trusting her voice. He studied her for a moment longer, then reached out and gently brushed a streak of mud from her forehead. His touch was careful, impersonal, but it sent a shock of warmth through her. You did good, he said quietly. Then he turned and climbed back into the coach. Graceline stood there frozen, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Back inside the coach. Everyone settled into wet, uncomfortable silence. The older woman ran out her shuffle. The merchant complained about his ruined shoes. The farm couple huddled together, shivering. Graceline sat across from the stranger, acutely aware of how close their knees were, how the space between them seemed to hum with something unspoken. She wondered if he felt it, too. Wondered if he noticed the way her eyes kept drifting to his hands. His yav, the line of his shoulders. Stop it, she told herself. You're being foolish. But her heart didn't listen. The road smoothed out as they climbed into higher countries. The mud gave way to rocky ground, then to open grassland dotted with juniper and pine. The air smelled cleaner here, sharp with resin and wild flowers. Graceline's eyelids grew heavy. She'd slept maybe 3 hours the night before, and the adrenaline from pushing the coach had burned off, leaving her hollow and exhausted. She tried to sit up straight to keep her eyes open, but sleep pulled at her like hands dragging her underwater. Her head bobbed once, twice. She jerked awake, mortified. Across from her, the stranger watched with something that might have been amusement. Graceline clenched her jaw and stared hard out the window, determined not to embarrass herself again. But exhaustion didn't care about pride. Her eyes drifted shut, her head tipped sideways, seeking something solid to rest against. And then she was asleep. Deeply and completely, her cheek pressed against the stranger's shoulder. She didn't feel him shift carefully, adjusting his coat. Saw the fabric cushioned her face. Didn't feel his hand move to steady her when the coach hit a bump. Didn't hear the older woman smile softly across from them. She used slept dreamless and still. For the first time in weeks. Somewhere in the depths of sleep, she mumbled. Don't forget the rent money under the flower kin. And don't touch the good sugar. The stranger's mouth twitched. He glanced down at her. Then at the older woman, who was trying very hard not to laugh. He said nothing. Just let her sleep. Graceline woke to the sound of the driver shouting directions to the horses. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she became aware of warmth beneath her cheek, the faint smell of wool and soap, the steady rise and fall of breathing that wasn't hers. Her eyes snapped open. She was leaning against the stranger's shoulder fully, completely, her head resting on him like he was a pillow she'd brought from home. Graceline jerked upright so fast. Her vision swam. Oh no. Yemeso, sir. The stranger regarded her calmly. No trace of annoyance on his face. You needed the rest. I did. She told not even finish the sentence. Her face burned hotter than a branding iron. The older woman across from them smiled kindly. You snored just a little, dear. Very ladylike. Graceline wanted to throw herself out of the moving coach. The stranger's eyes glinted with something that might have been laughter. You also mentioned rent money and a flower kin. Should you be concerned about your financial advice? She stared at him horrified. I what something about rent money under the flower kin and not touching the good sugar. The older woman pressed her hand to her mouth, shoulders shaking. Graceline covered her face with both hands. Please tell me I'm having a nightmare. If I ever pass through your town, the stranger said, his voice warm with suppressed amusement. I'll be sure to visit that flower kin. That did it. Gracelande's mortification hit a level she didn't know existed. She turned her face to the window and refused to look at anyone for the next hour. But despite the embarrassment burning in her chest, she felt something else, too. Something lighter, almost like laughter trying to escape. She'd fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder and drooled on his coat and talked about rent money in her sleep. And he used let her. No judgment, no irritation, just quiet acceptance. It had been so long since anyone had simply let her be human. The coach rolled into Cedar Springs just as the sun broke through the clouds. The town spread out before them, one main street lined with wooden sidewalks, a general store, a saloon, a whitewashed church with a crooked steeple, and at the far end a small building with a sign that read Cedar Springs Infirmary. Graceline's heart clenched. Somewhere in that building, her mother lay dying. The coach pulled to a stop outside the stage office. The driver climbed down and opened the door. Cedar Springs, folks. End of the line. The merchant pushed past everyone, already complaining about the delay and the mood and the quality of the horses. The farm couple climbed down stiffly, their faces gray with exhaustion. The older woman gathered her carpet back and offered Graceline a warm smile. Safe travels, dear. I hope your mother recovers. Thank you, Graceline whispered. She reached for her bag, but the stranger had already lifted it. He stepped down from the coach and waited on the street, holding her back like it weighed nothing. Graceline climbed down carefully, her legs shaky. After 2 days of sitting, the stranger handed her the bag, then surprised her by saying, I'll walk you to the infirmary. You don't have to. I know. He picked up his own bag and started walking. Graceline hurried to keep up, her shorter legs working double time to match his long stride. Cedar Springs looked smaller than she remembered. She'd visited once as a child when her mother's sister still lived here. Now the town had a worn, tired quality. Paint peeling from storefronts, boardwalku sem segim, windows filmed with dust. They walked in silence, their footsteps echoing on the wooden sidewalk. Graceline kept glancing at him sideways, wondering what he was thinking, wondering why he kept helping her when he didn't have to. The infirmary sat at the edge of town. A simple frame building with a covered porch and lace curtains in the windows. A woman in a grey dress swept the porch steps. Graceline's stomach twisted. This was it. Whatever she found inside those doors would change everything. The stranger stopped at the base of the steps. He set down his back and looked at her directly. Good luck, he said. She wanted to thank him. She wanted to say something meaningful about what the past 2 days had meant. But her throat closed up and all she managed was, thank you for the shoulder. His mouth curved. A real smile this time, slow and warm. Anytime. Then he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her standing there with her heart beating too fast and her thoughts in complete chaos. Graceline watched him go until he turned a corner and disappeared. Then she took a deep breath, gripped her back tightly, and walked up the steps into the infirmary. Inside the air smelled of boiled linen and crushed herbs. The whitewashed walls felt too bright after the dim coach. A young nurse looked up from a desk. Can I help you? I am here to see Cassandra Reynolds. She is my mother. The nurse's expression softened. Room 3 down the hall. Gracelyn walked slowly, her boots loud on the wooden floor. She passed a room where someone coughed wetly, past another where a child whimpered. Then she reached room 3. The door stood half open. She pushed it the rest of the way and stepped inside. Her mother lay in a narrow iron bed covered with a thin quilt. She looked so small. When had she gotten so small? Her hair, once thick and dark, had gone completely white. Her face lined with years of hard work and harder losses seemed almost translucent. But her eyes, sharp, bright, impossibly alive, opened when Gracelyn entered. "There's my girl," she whispered. Gracelyn dropped her back and crossed the room in 3 steps. She fell to her knees beside the bed and took her mother's hand, cold, papery, fragile as barred bones. "Mama." They stayed like that for a long time, not speaking, just holding on. Finally, her mother shifted slightly and studied Gracelyn's face. "You look exhausted." "I am fine, liar." Her mother's voice was weak, but firm. "You've been carrying the word again, haven't you?" Gracelyn told not to answer. The tears she'd been holding back for 2 days finally spilled over. Her mother squeezed her hand. "There now, you're here. Everything is going to be all right." But Gracelyn wasn't sure she believed that anymore. The next morning, Gracelyn sat beside her mother's bed, reading aloud from a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress the nurse had lent her. Her mother drifted in and out of sleep, occasionally squeezing Gracelyn's hand when something in the story pleased her. A knock sounded at the door. Gracelyn looked up and froze. The stranger stood in the doorway, hat in hand, holding a small bundle of wild flowers, purple arse, and yellow blood-scared Susans tied with a piece of twine. Her mother's eyes sharpened. Immediately. "Well, know who is this? We traveled on the same coach." Gracelyn stammered. "He helped when we got stuck in the mud." The stranger stepped into the room and offered the flowers to Cassandra. "Thought you might like some color in here, ma'am." Cassandra took the flowers, studying him with the piercing gaze of a woman who'd raised 6 children and buried 3. "You're too handsome to be used a travel companion. My daughter doesn't attract used friends with shoulders like that." "Mama," Gracelyn hissed, mortified. The stranger's mouth twitched. "I'll take that as a compliment, ma'am." Cassandra settled back against her pillows, looking entirely too pleased with herself. "Are you staying in town long?" "Haven't decided yet." Her eyes flicked between them. "Gracelyn, why don't you show this kind gentleman where to find a decent meal? I need to rest anyway." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Gracelyn stood reluctantly. "Mama, I don't think go." Cassandra said before I start asking him his intentions. The stranger's eyes glinted with barely suppressed laughter. Gracelyn grabbed her shuffle and fled the room before her mother could embarrass her further. Outside the morning sun had burned off the clouds. Cedar Springs looked almost pretty in the clear light, dusty and worn, but alive. A dog barked somewhere. Chickens scratched in the dirt beside the general store. The blacksmith's hammer rang out steady and sure. They walked side by side, not speaking at first. Finally, Gracelyn said, "I am sorry about my mother. She is direct. She is dying. She doesn't have time for anything else." The bluntness of his words struck her like a fist. She stopped walking. He stopped too, turning to face her. His gray eyes were steady. "Not cruel, just honest. My mother died 5 years ago," he said quietly. "Consumption. It took her 6 months. Near the end, she said whatever came into her head. No filters, no politeness, just the truth." Gracelyn swallowed hard. "I am sorry." He shrugged slightly. "Point is, your mother has earned the right to speak her mind. Don't apologize to her." They started walking again. Gracelyn led him toward a small cafe tucked between the general store and a tailor's shop. The sign read, Mabel's kitchen. Good food. Fair prices. Inside the smell of fresh bread and frying bacon wrapped around them like a blanket. A stout woman with gray hair and flour-dusted hands looked up from the counter. Sit anywhere, folks. Coffee is hot. They chose a table by the window. The stranger ordered steak and eggs. Gracine ordered used coffee until he said to Mabel, "Bring her the same as me." "I can't." "You can," he said. "Or we can argue about it until your coffee gets cold. Your choice." Gracin glared at him. He raised an eyebrow completely unbothered. She gave up. While they waited for the food, she studied him openly for the first time. Really looked at him. He had the kind of face that didn't give much away. Strong jaw, straight nose, lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. His hands rested on the table, broad and scarred across the knuckles. Working hands. "What is your name?" she asked suddenly. "Ryan Fitzpatrick. I am Gracelyn Hudson." "I know," she blinked. "How?" asked the nurse. "Yesterday." Something warm unfurled in her chest. Had I asked about her? Had come back. Had I brought her mother flowers? "Why?" she asked. "Why? What? Why are you doing all this?" Ryan leaned back in his chair. "Considering you remind me of someone who, my sister. She raised 3 kids alone after her husband died. In a mining accident. Worked herself half to death trying to keep them fed. Refused help from anyone because she thought needing help meant she'd failed." His voice was quiet, matter of fact, but Graceline heard the weight behind it. "Where is she now?" she asked. "Montana, remarried last year to a decent man who treats her kids like his own." Ryan's expression softened slightly. "Took her 10 years to let someone in. I always thought that was a waste of time." Gracine didn't know what to say to that. She stared at her coffee soup, turning it slowly in her hands. Their food arrived. Thick slabs of steak, eggs fried in butter, fried potatoes, toast slattered with jam. Gracelyn ate slowly, savoring every bite. Halfway through the meal, Ryan said, "What will you do after your mother?" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Graceland set down her fork. "Go. Oh. Back to my son. Back to laundry and sewing and hoping the landlord doesn't sell the cabin out from under me. Have you ever thought about doing something else all the time? Doesn't change reality. What would you do if you could?" She hesitated. Nobody had asked her that question in years. "I used to want to write," she said quietly. "Stories, articles, anything. My father taught me to read when I was 4. By the time I was 10, I'd read every book in our house twice." I thought she stopped feeling foolish. "You thought what?" "I thought I'd work for a newspaper. Someday, travel, write about real things happening in the world. Stupid dream for a girl with no education and no money." Ryan studied her across the table. "Doesn't sound stupid to me." "Well, it didn't matter anyway. I got married at 19, had a baby at 20, became a widow at 23. Dreams don't survive that." "Maybe not," Ryan said. "But that doesn't mean you have to stop having them." Gracelyn looked up sharply. His face was serious. No trace of mockery or condescension. He meant it. Something shifted in her chest, a loosening like a fist, unslashing after years of holding tight. After they finished eating, Ryan walked her back toward the infirmary. They passed a small building with a painted sign that read Cedar Springs Gazette, print shop, and news office. Gracin slowed, staring at the sign. "You should go in," Ryan said. "What?" "No, it's old not." "Why not?" "Because I am not qualified. I don't have experience. I don't even live here." "You can read and write, can't you?" "Well, yes, but then you're qualified enough to ask." He opened the door and held it, waiting. Gracelyn stared at him, heart pounding. You're impossible, as I've been told. She took a breath and walked inside. Before she could talk herself out of it. The print shop smelled of ink and hot metal. A massive printing press dominated one corner, its gears and rollers gleaming. A boy of maybe 12 stood at a compositor's table, arranging type with quick practiced fingers. A woman in a practical brown dress and ink-stained apron looked up from a desk covered in papers. "Help you?" she asked. Graceline's carriage nearly failed. Then she felt Ryan's presence behind her, solid, patient, and forced herself to speak. "I am looking for work, writing work." The woman's eyebrows rose. "Do you have experience?" "No, but I can write and I work hard." The woman set down her pen and studied Graceline with sharp assassin eyes. "What is your name?" "Graceline Hudson." "You from Cedar Springs?" "No, Mom. I am here caring for my mother at the infirmary." "How long are you staying?" "I don't know yet." The woman tapped her fingers on the desk, thinking. Finally, she said, "There was a barn fire outside town last week. Miller's Platze. I need someone to interview the family." "Write it up." 500 words. "Can you do that?" Graceland's heart hammered. "Yes. Bring it to me by Friday. If it is good, I'll pay you $2 and consider more work." $2? Graceland's hands shook. $2 was food for a week. $2 was hope. "Thank you," she managed. "I won't let you down." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Well, see. What is your name again?" "Graceline Hudson." "I am Bethany Sierra. I run this paper. Don't make me regret this." Outside, Graceline stood on the sidewalk, breathing hard. Ryan stood beside her, hands in his pockets, looking entirely unsurprised. "You did that," she said. "No. You did. You pushed me." "Maybe, but you walked through the door." She wanted to be angry at his presumption. Instead, she felt lighter than she had in years. Over the next few days, Graceline fell into a rhythm. In the mornings, she sat with her mother, reading or used holding her hand. Afternoons, she worked on the barnfire story, interviewing the Miller family, taking careful notes, writing and rewriting until the words felt right. Ryan appeared every day. Sometimes with flowers for Cassandra, sometimes with coffee for Graceline. He never stayed long, never pushed for more than she was willing to give, but his presence became something she looked forward to. Steady, quiet, reassuring. One evening, she found him waiting outside the infirmary as the sun set. She walked over, tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear. "You're still here," she said. "Where else would I be?" She didn't have an answer for that. They walked together to the edge of town where a stand of cottonwoods grew along a narrow creek. The water burbled over smooth stones. Birds called from the branches overhead. Ryan stopped and turned to face her. "Tell me something real." Graceline's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Something true? Something new. Don't I say out loud?" She hesitated. Then slowly she said, "I am terrified of losing my mother, of going back to a life where I am always one broken wheel away from disaster, of dying without ever doing anything that mattered." Her voice broke on the last word. Ryan stepped closer. "You matter. You don't know that." "I do." The certainty in his voice shook something loose inside her. She looked up at him, at his steady gray eyes, his serious face, the way he stood like had a weather any storm without flinching. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "Because I see you," he said. "Simple. And I think you've been invisible for too long." Graceline's eyes burned. Nobody had ever said anything like that to her. Nobody had ever looked at her the way Ryan Fitzpatrick did. Like she was worth something beyond what she could do or fix or carry. Before she could respond, a voice called from the direction of town. "Miss Hudson, Miss Hudson, come quick." Graceline's blood went cold. She ran. The nurse met her at The infirmary door, her face pale. Your mother's heart. The doctor's with her. Now, but you should come. Graceline flew down the hall and into her mother's room. Cassandra lay propped on pillows, her breathing shallow and labored. The doctor, a thin man with grave whiskers, stepped back from the bed. She is stable. For now, he said quietly. But it is close. Stay with her. Graceline sank into the chair beside the bed and took her mother's hand. Cassandra's eyes fluttered open. There you are, she whispered. I am here, Mama. I am not going anywhere. Good. Cassandra's grip tightened vaguely. Listen to me. That man Ryan. He's good. Don't push him away. Because you're scared. Mama, this isn't the time. It is exactly the time. Cassandra's voice gained a thread of strength. It didn't raise you to be a coward. If something good comes along, you grab it with both hands. Graceline's throat closed. I don't know how. Yes. You do. You just forgot. Cassandra smiled faintly. No, go get some air. Before you start crying and make me feel guilty. Graceline left through her tears. She kissed her mother's forehead and stepped into the hallway. Ryan sat in a hard wooden chair against the wall. He stood when he saw her. She is all right, Graceline said quickly. For now, he nodded. Good. They stood there in the dim hallway, not speaking. Then Ryan said, I am not leaving. You don't have to stay. I know. He sat back down in the chair. Graceline hesitated, then sat beside him. They stayed there all night through the long, dark hours when the infirmary cracked and settled through the coldest part of Peredon when Graceline's eyes burned with exhaustion. Ryan didn't talk, didn't push. He just sat beside her, steady as stone. Near dawn, Graceline's head dipped toward his shoulder. This time, she didn't fight it. She let herself rest against him just for a moment. Thank you, she whispered. His hand found hers in the darkness. You're welcome. When the sun finally rose, Cassandra was still breathing. By Friday, Graceline had finished the Barnfire story. She'd rewritten it 3 times, trimmed unnecessary words, polished every sentence until it shone. Her hands shook as she walked to the Gazette office and handed the pages to Bethany Sierra. Bethany read it slowly, her face giving nothing away. Finally, she looked up. This is good work, Graceline's heart soared. Really, really. Clear, concise, human. The Millers will appreciate how you told their story. Bethany counted out $2 in coins and handed them over. I have another assignment if you want it. Town council meeting next Tuesday. Same rate. Yes. Graceline said immediately. Yes, absolutely. She left the office walking on air. $2 clutched in her hand. Another assignment waiting. It wasn't a mug, but it was hers. Earned by her own work, her own words. She ran all the way back to the infirmary and burst into her mother's room, breathless. Cassandra was sitting up slightly, looking stronger than she had in days. Graceline spread the coins on the blanket. I did it. Mama. I wrote a story and they paid me for it. Cassandra's eyes filled with tears. She reached out and touched Graceline's cheek. I always knew, even when you forgot. They held each other, crying and laughing at the same time. Later, when Graceline stepped outside for air, she found Ryan waiting by the fence. She walked over and pressed the newspaper, fresh from that morning's printing against his chest. He took it and read the line at the bottom of the article. By Graceline Hudson. That is me, she said, grinning like a fool. He looked at her with something warm and proud in his eyes. So, you're in print now. Feels like I finally stepped into my own life. Ryan set the paper aside and touched her cheek just lightly with the backs of his fingers. Looks good on you. Graceline's breath caught. They stood there inches apart, the word fading to just the two of them. She thought he might kiss her. She thought she might let him. Instead, he stepped back and said, I need to tell you something. The seriousness in his voice sent a chill through her. What? Let us walk. They headed out of town, toward the cottonwoods by the creek. Ryan was quiet the whole way, his jaw tight. Graceline's stomach knotted. Finally, he stopped and turned to face her. I didn't come to Cedar Springs by accident. What do you mean? I came here on business. Land business. He paused. Your land specifically. Graceline went very still. I don't understand. Ryan pulled a folded paper from his coat and handed it to her. She opened it with shaking hands. It was a legal document dense with clauses and terminology she barely understood. But she caught enough words to piece it together. Water rights. Disputed claims. Her late husband's name. There's a group of men trying to force you of your property, Ryan said quietly. They want the water rights. There's a stream that runs through your land that feeds into a larger river. If they control it, they control irrigation for half the county. Graceline stared at the paper. Why are you involved? I own a ranch outside Billings. Big operation, cattle, horses. Some farming. I've been buying a plant with good water for the past 5 years. He met her eyes when he heard about the situation with your property. I came to investigate. I thought I'd find someone being cheated who didn't know what they had. I thought I'd make an offer, maybe help them out. You thought you'd take me land, she said flatly. I thought I'd buy it fairly. Yes, until I met you. And then what? You decided to court me instead so you could get it for free. Ryan's face hardened. No, I decided to shut down the men trying to cheat you. He pulled out another set of papers. These are transfers I filed last week. I bought out the water claims those men were using to pressure you. They can't touch your property now. Graceline's hands shook. Why would you do that? Because it was the right thing to do. You don't even know me. I know enough. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw the papers in his face, wanted to demand why he hadn't told her any of this from the beginning. Instead, she asked quietly, did you sit beside me in that coach? Because you knew who I was, Ryan hesitated. I knew your name from the land records. I didn't know you. That is not an answer. Yes, he said finally. I knew who you were when I helped you with your back, but everything after the storm, the shoulder, the flowers for your mother. That had nothing to do with land. Graceline turned away, her chest tight. She didn't know what to feel. Angry, grateful, betrayed. You should have told me, she said. I know. I thought you used. She stopped, unable to finish. Ryan stepped closer. You thought what? I thought you used some, she whispered. Not what I owned or what I could give you. Used me. His hand caught her wrist. Gentle but firm. I do see you. That is why I made sure you'd keep what is yours. You have the right to hold your land, Graceline. Those men were trying to steal it. I stopped them. She looked down at the papers in her hand. So, what do you want from me now? Nothing you don't want to give. That is not an answer either. Ryan's jaw worked. Then quietly, he said, I want to know if there is a chance you might let me stay in your life. Not because of land or water, rights or anything else. Just because I think you're the strongest, bravest woman I've ever met, and I'd like to see where this goes. Graceline's throat ahead. She wanted to say yes. Wanted to fall into his arms and let him fix everything like he seems so capable of doing. But she'd spent 4 years learning to stand on her own. No matter how steady his eyes were. I need time, she said. Ryan nodded. Take all you need. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone by the creek with a handful of papers and a heart full of confusion. That night, Graceline sat beside her mother's bed and told her everything. Cassandra listened without interrupting. Her thin fingers laced with Graceline's. When Graceline finished, Cassandra said. Do you trust him? I don't know. Yes, you do. You just don't want to. Graceline closed her eyes. What if I'm wrong? What if you're right? It was the same question Cassandra had asked when Graceline had hesitated about marrying Thomas all those years ago. The same question she'd asked when Graceline had considered giving up on keeping the land after Thomas died. Graceline had been right both times. He used his power to protect me, she said slowly. Not control me. Sounds like a good man to me. But what if he expects something in return? Cassandra squeezed her hand. Baby, everyone expects something. The question is whether what they're offering is worth what they're asking. Graceline thought about Ryan sitting beside her all night in that hard chair. Thought about him buying her meals without making her feel small. Thought about the way he looked at her when she showed him her published story. Proud like her success was his success. I think I love him, she whispered. Cassandra smiled. I know, sweetheart. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The next morning, Graceline found Ryan at the small hotel where he'd been staying. He answered the door in his shirt sleeves, suspenders hanging loose, hair slightly amused. He looked surprised to see her. Can we talk? She asked. He nodded and stepped aside to let her in. The room was simple. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single chair. By the window. Ryan's coat hung on a peg. His boots sat neatly by the door. Graceline stood in the middle of the room, gathering her courage. I thought about what you said, she began, about the land and the water rights and everything else. Ryan waited, his face unreadable. You could have used bought me out and left. Or you could have used what you knew to manipulate me. But you didn't. You used your resources to protect something that was mine. She took a breath. I don't know if I am ready to trust easily, but I think I am ready to try. Something shifted in Ryan's expression. Relief, hope, something warm. And unguarded. I don't need it easy, he said quietly. I just need to be honest. Then here's honesty. Graceline stepped closer. I am scared of needing someone. Of letting someone take care of me, of losing myself in someone else's life. I am not asking you to lose yourself. I am asking you to let me stand beside you. What if I can't do goat? Then we'll figure it out together. Graceline looked up at him, at this man who'd sat with her through storms and long nights and grief. This man who'd seen her at her worst and hadn't turned away. All right, she whispered. Ryan's hands framed her face, gentle and sure. All right, okay. He kissed her, then slow, careful, asking permission with every movement. Graceline kissed him back, pouring everything she told not to say into the press of her lips against his. When they finally broke apart, she was breathless and grinning like a fool. I should probably tell you something, Ryan said. What? You asked your mother for permission to court you yesterday. Graceline left. You did what? Seemed like the right thing to do. What did she say? She said, if he didn't marry you, she'd haunt me. Graceline buried her face against his chest, laughing so hard. Her ribs hard. 2 weeks later, Ryan Fitzpatrick asked Graceline Hudson to marry him under the cottonwoods by the creek. He didn't have a fancy speech prepared. He just said, the road changed the moment you fell asleep on me. I don't want the rest of it if you're not there. Graceline cried and laughed and said yes. They were married in the little whitewashed church on a bright October morning. Cassandra sat in the front pew, too weak to stand, but smiling so hard her face glowed. Zachary stood beside her, clutching the carved wooden horse like a talisman. Bethany Sierra came along with half the town. The Millers came. The nurse from the infirmary came. Even the boy from the print shop came, his hands scrubbed clean of ink for the occasion. During the vows, Zachary blurted out, "Are we eating now or do you have to kiss first?" The church erupted in laughter. The minister tried to restore order. Graceline covered her face with her hands, mortified, but also delighted. Ryan just grinned and said, almost done, son. Hold tight. At the small reception afterward, held in the church hall with apple cider and spice cake. Someone joked about how it all started. Imagine the old woman from the stage. Coach said. All this because she drooled on the right shoulder. It did not drool. Graceline protested. Ryan put his hand over his heart, eyes dancing. Me coat never recovered, but me heart did. Graceline swatted his arm, but she was laughing too hard to be mad. Cassandra watched from her chair, tears streaming down her face, and thought her daughter had finally found exactly what she deserved. As the reception wounded down, and guests began to depart, Ryan and Graceline slipped away to the small cabin on the edge of town that would serve as their home for now. The door closed behind them with a soft click, shutting out the weird moonlight. Filtered through the thin curtains, casting a silver glow over the simple room. The bed with its fresh linens, the washstand in the corner, the faint scent of wild flowers from a vase on the table. Ryan turned to her, his grey eyes dark with emotion. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her avant. Then her cheek, as if memorizing her face. Graceline stepped closer, laying her hands flat against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat under her palm. Their first kiss as husband and wife was slow, reverent, almost shy. The second carried the weight of every long night, every near loss, every fragile hope they shared on the road and in the little town that had changed both their lives. They moved with the careful wonder of two people who had learned to live without softness, now finally allowed to rest in it. Clothes were set aside in quiet, nervous laughter. Whispered endearments filled the small space. When they finally lay together, it was not with haste, but with a tenderness that made Graceline's eyes stink. Ryan was gentle and sure, pausing whenever she hesitated, listening to every breath, every small sound. She met him with growing confidence, trusting him with parts of herself she'd never imagined she'd give to anyone again. They moved together until words no longer seemed necessary. The room faded to nothing but warmth and shared breath and the steady, anchoring weight of his arms around her. When sleep finally came, it found them tangled in each other. The first light of dawn just beginning to edge its way past the curtains, blessing the start of the life they had chosen together. They built a life together. Ryan and Graceline Fitzpatrick, not the life either of them had imagined, but something better. Messier, louder, fuller than either could have planned. Ryan bought a piece of land just outside Cedar Springs. Rolling hills with good water, room for cattle and horses, and the kind of future that stretched out wide and hopeful. He built Graceline a house with his own hands, every board chosen carefully, every nail driven through. It wasn't a mansion, but it had real glass windows and a porch that faced the sunrise, and a kitchen big enough for the family. He hoped they'd have. Zachary called him power within a month of the wedding. Ryan taught him to ride, to rope, to fix a fence line that had gone slack. He was patient with the boy, in a way that made Graceline's chest ache with gratitude. They hung a small shelf in the front room where the carved wooden horse sat, right beside a framed copy of Graceline's first published article. In the kitchen, tucked in the pantry, they kept a Larui metal flower kin. It became their private yoke. The place where they stored spare coins, small treasures, receipts for land purchases, and cattle sales. Graceline would catch Ryan grinning at it sometimes. What, she'd ask. Just remembering you telling me about rent. Money in your sleep. I will never live that down, will I? Not a chance, Graceline continued writing for the Cedar Springs Gazette. Her columns expanded from town news to pieces about frontier life, the struggles of homesteaders, the quiet bravery of women holding families together with nothing but grit and determination. Her words traveled to other towns, got reprinted in larger papers. People started recognizing her name. Bethany Sierra gave her more responsibility, editing other writers' work, deciding which stories mattered. shaping the voice of the paper. The pay increased. Gracelyn started keeping her own account at the bank, money she'd earned with her words. Ryan never once suggested she should stop. He shifted wrench work around her writing schedule, hired extra hands when needed, and made sure she had the time and space to do what she loved. "You're good at this," he'd say when she showed him a new piece. "You have to say that you're my husband. You don't have to say anything. But it is still true." They argued sometimes about money, about how to raise Zachary, about whether to buy more land or invest in better breeding stock, but they argued fair, without cruelty. And they always made up before bed. In their second year of marriage, Gracelyn discovered she was pregnant. She told Ryan while they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He went very still, his hand frozen on her knee. "You're sure?" he asked. "Pretty sure?" He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. Their daughter was born in April, a squalling red-faced teen with Ryan's gray eyes and Gracelyn's dark hair. They named her Cassandra after the grandmother who'd lived just long enough to hold her once before slipping away peacefully in her sleep. 2 years later, a son followed. Another boy with Zachary's serious expression and Ryan's steady hands. The house filled with noise, children crying, laughing, fighting over toys. Gracelyn's writing time shrank to early mornings before anyone else woke up. Late nights after everyone slept. But she didn't mind. This house, this beautiful mess was exactly what she dreamed of during those dark years after Thomas died. One evening, when the babe was maybe 6 months old, Ryan was giving orders to a wrench hand while holding the infant against his shoulder. The baby promptly peed all over Ryan's clean shirt. Ryan froze. The wrench hand tried very hard not to laugh. Ryan looked down at the spreading wet stain and muttered, "Kettle never did this to me." Gracelyn, watching from the porch, smirked, "That is because Kettle don't love you enough." Ryan shot her a look. Then he started laughing, too. The wrench grew. Ryan's reputation as a fair dealer and a smart businessman spread. He bought more grazing land, invested in better equipment, treated his workers with the kind of respect that made good men want to stay. Gracelyn helped with the ledgers, her literacy, and growing confidence, making her a natural partner in the business. Together, they built something that would last, not just wealth, but a legacy. The flower kin is filled with more than coins now, receipts for land purchases, contracts with suppliers, letters from banks offering favorable terms. What had started as a joke became a symbol of everything they built together. One night, after the children were asleep, Ryan and Gracelyn sat on the porch watching fireflies dance across the yard. "Have you ever thought about that, stagecoach?" Ryan asked. "All the time. What do you think about it?" Gracelyn leaned against his shoulder, the same shoulder she'd fallen asleep on all those years ago. "I think about how different my life would be if I hadn't been too tired to stay awake. If you'd been annoyed instead of kind, if you'd left Cedar Springs without looking back." Ryan's arm came around her. "I think about how lucky I was to be in the right coach at the right time. Luck had nothing to do with it. No. You chose to be kind. I chose to trust you. Everything after that was just us choosing each other over and over." Ryan kissed the top of her head. "Best choice I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds. Crickets, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of the porch swing. Inside, a child cried out in sleep. Gracelyn started to rise, but Ryan stood first. "I'll get her. You rest." Gracelyn watched him disappear into the house and felt her heart swell almost painfully. This man, this steady, impossible, wonderful man, had taken her broken life and helped her build it into something whole. She'd been a poor widow counting pennies at a kitchen table, terrified of losing everything. Now she was a wife, a mother, a writer, a partner in a thriving ranch. The flower kin in the Kitchen held more money than she'd ever dreamed possible. But the real wealth was here in this house, in these children, in this man who'd caught her when she fell and never let go. 20 years. Passed like water over stones, steady, inevitable, shaping everything it touched. The ranch sprawled across 300 acres now, employing a dozen hands year round, and twice that during cattle drives. The house had been expanded. More bedrooms for more children, a proper office for Gracelines writing, a library that Ryan had built as a surprise on their 10th anniversary. Zachary had grown into a man, tall and steady like his stepfather, running the day-to-day operations of the ranch with quiet competence. Had married a school teacher from Billings. A bright-eyed woman named Sana, who read poetry, and left at his terrible jokes. Cassandra, the daughter, was 17 now, smart as a whip and stubborn as a mule. She'd inherited her mother's way with words and her father's unshackable calm. She wanted to go east for college, study journalism at a real university. Ryan and Graceline had argued about it for months before finally agreeing to let her go. The younger son had Ryan's hands and Graceline's restless energy. He wanted to be a doctor and spent hours reading medical texts borrowed from the town physician. There were 2 more children after that. Another girl and a boy who'd arrived late and unexpectedly 10 years younger than their nearest sibling. They chased fireflies in the yard now, shrieking with laughter in the summer twilight. Graceline sat on the porch swing, watching them with a soft smile. Her hair had gone silver at the temples. Lines creased her face, left lines, very lines, the map of a life fully lived. She wore a simple dress, her hands ink-stained from a morning spent writing. She has published 3 books now. Collections of essays about frontier life, about women's work, about the quiet heroism of ordinary people. They sold well enough to earn her a small but devoted following. Publishers wrote, asking for more. Ryan stepped out onto the porch, moving a little slower than he used to, but still strong. His hair had gone completely gray. His face weathered by sun and wind and years of hard work. But his eyes, those calm gray eyes, were exactly the same. He sat beside her on the swing and took her hand. "Kids wearing you out?" he asked. "Always." They sat in comfortable silence, the swing cracking gently. The yard stretched before them, lush with grass, dotted with trees they'd planted together. The barn stood solid and red in the fading light. Cattle flow in distant pastures. The carved wooden horse still sat on its shelf inside beside a dozen framed articles and a wedding photograph so faded the faces were almost ghosts. The flower kin sat in the pantry full of papers and receipts and small treasures the children had added over the years, pressed flowers, smooth stones, a lock of baby hair. It had become legend in the family. The flower kin grandmother had talked about the beginning of everything. "You remember that stagecoach ride?" Graceline asked. Ryan smiled. "Everyday liar." "All right." Most days, she leaned against his shoulder and he shifted to accommodate her weight. The same position, the same comfort. "If he hadn't fallen asleep on you," she said softly, "I'd still be alone, still counting pennies, still too scared to dream. If you hadn't fallen asleep on me, I'd still be a lonely man, convinced I didn't need anyone. We were both fools. Lucky fools." One of the youngest children ran over, grass-stained and breathless. "Mama, Papa, tell us the story again." "Which story?" Ryan asked, though he knew perfectly well which one, the shoulder story. The other children gathered. Even Zachary and Kenya, who'd heard it 100 times. Even Cassandra, who pretended to be too old for family stories, but always listened anyway. Graceline laughed. "You've all heard it 1,000 times. Tell it anyway," Cassandra said. So Graceline told it about the muddy road and the terrifying storm. And the moment her exhausted head fell onto a stranger's shoulder, about waking up mortified, about sleep-talking rent money and flower kins, about a man who could have pushed her away but chose kindness instead. Ryan added his parts about seeing a tired widow and recognizing someone worth knowing, about sitting through a long night in a hard chair, about asking her mother for permission to court her. The children left at the familiar parts. They sighed at the romantic parts. They demanded to hear about the wedding again, about Zacharias' interruption, about the coat that never recovered. When the story finally ended, the youngest child asked, "Did you really love mama from the first time you saw her, papa?" Ryan looked at Graceline. His expression warm and certain. "I think I loved her from the moment she insulted me, quote." Graceline swatted his arm. "I didn't insult it. I observed that you were suspiciously clean." Same Tim. The children dissolved into giggles. Eventually, they drifted back to their games, leaving Ryan and Graceline alone. On the porch as the sun sank lower. "Do you think they'll remember?" Graceline asked quietly. "When we're gone, will they remember what we built here?" "They'll remember," Ryan said. "Not just the ranch or the money. They'll remember that two broken people found each other and chose to be whole together." Graceline's eyes burned. "That is pretty poetic for a rancher. I've been married to a writer for 20 years. Some of it had to rupoch." She laughed and wiped her eyes. The fireflies began to emerge. Tiny lights dancing across the darkening yard. The children chased them, their laughter carrying on the warm evening air. Graceline thought about the woman she'd been desperate, exhausted. Convinced that hope was a luxury she could not afford. She thought about the man who'd seen past her worn dress and tired eyes to the person underneath. She thought about everything they'd built together, not just with money and land but with kindness and patience, and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ryan turned to her. "For what?" "For letting me sleep on your shoulder. For buying me breakfast. For staying when I was too scared to ask you to. For building this life with me." Ryan's hand found hers, their fingers latching together with the ease of decades of practice. "Thank you for trusting me," he said. "For letting me in, for being brave enough to dream again." They sat in the gathering darkness. Two people who'd find each other on a dusty road and decided to walk the rest of it together. In Cedar Springs, their story had become legend, told at a church, socials and around campfires, embellished with each retelling, but always true at the core. The story of a poor widow who fell asleep on a cowboy's shoulder, and the cowboy who decided that shoulder was exactly where she belonged. The story of two people who'd lost everything and found something better in each other. The story of love that started with exhaustion and embarrassment and sleep talking about flower things and grew into something that outlived storms and grief and every obstacle the frontier could throw at them. A love that lasted. Ryan's arm came around Graceline's shoulders. She settled against him, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and leather and "Oh, I'd do it all again," she whispered. "Every hard part, every scary moment, all of it." "Me too," Ryan said. Every single day, the fireflies danced. The children left. The night settled soft and warm around them. And on a porch in Montana, two people who'd started as strangers on a stagecoach sat together, complete and content, living proof that sometimes the best things in life begin when you're too tired to keep your guard up and brave enough to